that is somebody spent most of my career fighting the evils and the oppressions of the occupation. There is no justification for what was done to us on October 7th, or the rockets before or after. And it is also true that some of the hardcore ideologues of groups on Hamas, even if there were to be a just peace tomorrow, would still be committed to our destruction. But we have a saying in the Jewish tradition, in Pirkei Avot, and we're taught the following: the sword comes into the world because of justice delayed and justice denied and the improper teaching of Torah. And with all the trepidation I feel about that very dangerous line between explanation and justification of what cannot be justified, our sages, when they wrote those words 2,000 years ago, they were not in favor of the sword, but they knew the world as it is. And if, as I said, there are those who, even when there be a just peace tomorrow, would still be committed to our destruction, what drives so many Palestinians into the hands of Hamas are the evils and the oppression of the ongoing occupation. And if we as Israelis ever want to have the peace and security that we deserve as anybody else, there's another image in the Talmud in the Tractate of Ta'anit, that of a person who wants to purify themselves from a ritual impurity in the ritual bath, the mikvah, after having touched a dead lizard. But they go into the mikvah to immerse themselves while still holding the dead lizard, as they can't purify themselves. And the reality is that, of course, again, without trying to justify the unjustifiable, reality is that also we as Israelis will not ever have the peace and security, the things that we deserve, as long as we are holding on to the occupation. And so when I now move to the West Bank, if you can understand the level of the anger and pain and fear that so many Israelis feel, particularly after October 7th. The situation, which, of course, as again, the entire history of the occupation has been an ongoing one of dispossession, of expulsion, of human rights abuses. But the analogy that the best analogy I can give is that while our eyes are so focused, understandably, on Gaza right now, the situation of Palestinians in the West Bank are like Japanese Americans after Pearl Harbor. When Japanese Americans were put in camps after Pearl Harbor, almost nobody was willing to stand with them or for them. It was only more than 40 years later, in 1988, that the US government officially apologized and began to compensate Japanese Americans and said what we did was a combination of racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. And for all the ways you can't, any analogy has its limits. I think those words are very apt. And the fact is that since October 7th, even many Israelis who were, at least in theory, with us in opposing the occupation, in opposing so much of what is happening, were simply no longer with us. They just didn't care. There's been some recovery over the months. Some people have come back to their senses. But that is, and that reality has been very cynically exploited by the settler movement. And I'll just give really two examples. First of all, one of the things that we see is that if we always said that for the most part, the Israeli security forces, the armed and police, and the state in general have been backing the occupation and the ongoing expansion of the occupation and of, as I said, the expulsion, dispossession. The reality is that one thing that's happened is there's been a blurring between settlers and soldiers. We talk a lot today about settlers in uniform, because one of the things that happened is that with all the forces fighting in Gaza, that settler security details were drafted into reserve duty, given guns and uniforms. And very often, when supposedly soldiers came in the middle of the night to bust into homes and terrorize, or to prevent Palestinians from getting to their agricultural lands, the Palestinians would say to us, you know, that guy, that soldier over there, we know him. He's from the North Settlement or outpost. So, among other things, a statistic I heard from somebody from the Red Cross, I haven't exactly checked it out, but it makes sense from what I've seen, is that during this year's olive harvest, only about 30% of olives were harvested. Now, I know one of the things I'm very proud of is that back in 2006, when I used to work for Rabbi Ascherman before leaving and creating Torah Center, we won a major Israeli high court victory before our high court decision, which to this day sets what the obligations are of Israeli security forces towards Palestinian farmers. So that although it's been chipped away over the years and it's never been fully observed by any means, the fact is that as a result of this decision, many Palestinians get to their olive groves and that they couldn't get to previously for 2, 5, 10, 15 years. And during the olive harvest or plowing seasons, you will actually see Israeli soldiers guarding Palestinians to get to their olive trees. Okay, that really did happen. Not this year though. And very often, you know, I would talk to people in the civil administration of the army, the people that liaison, and said, I understand you don't have the forces that usually during this time of year would be allocated to protecting farmers. But what we're seeing and hearing from location after location after location is not just that they're not protecting, that these settlers, or often as a settler, as the soldiers or settler soldiers, are actively preventing or expelling Palestinians from their trees, from their olive groves or whatever. And then, of course, the fact that since this war, 18 shepherding communities have been either fled their homes, or in some cases, literally expelled at gunpoint. But here, this is an example that these expulsions have gone on steroids, have the number is just jumped as a result of the fact that there was not even the people that formerly in Israeli society were willing to oppose these things, mostly were just not interested and not there. And I often say that I've never felt marginalized or on the fringes of Israeli society as frustrated as I've often been with so many Israelis who talk the talk but don't walk the walk and are theoretically against the occupation or against something but aren't really doing anything about it. I always know that there were many people that supported us, didn't feel on the fringe until today, in a way that I never did before. But this did not just start, again, with this war. In September of 2021, February of 2021, Zeb Hebu, one of the longtime strategists and ideologues for the settler movement, said in a lecture, in a talk at a conference of Amana, the organization which he heads, but he's also a convicted terrorist, convicted by Israeli court for being part of a Jewish terrorist underground. That we're very proud that we set up 30 shepherding outposts and intend to set up more. For many years, we've always said that if you just look at where the settlements are and where the buildings are, you're missing the point. You have to look at spheres of control, spheres of influence. And we often said that one of the fastest growing, the ways that the most Palestinian land was being taken over was not by building buildings, I say, but you prevent Palestinians with your guns from working their agricultural lands. You begin to work them yourselves, and then you use antiquated Ottoman laws to say they're ours, or at least we have the right to farm them. But that's even been supplanted. And what he said at in his talk at this conference was, the shepherding outposts are so much more effective in the amount of Palestinian land that they can take over and control and hold on to. Because basically, you just need a couple sheep and a couple tents and a couple settlers, and those sheep have to range far and wide to graze. And especially when they're being backed by Israeli security forces, they often are, they are preventing Palestinian shepherds from accessing their traditional grazing lands. And what that means is that, shepherds really face a triple whammy. The first part is just the outright violence and intimidation. But the second part is the economic impact. If you are a shepherd, you're living on the edge to begin with a very delicate, difficult balance between feeding your flock through grazing and bought feed. And because settlers and or security forces are preventing you from getting to your grazing lands, shepherding can become no longer economically viable because you have to buy more and more food. And for years we've known shepherds who have simply ended up selling off their flocks because they couldn't afford it anymore. Couldn't make a living that way. And then sometimes they sell the flock entirely and move, which is basically serves the unwritten but very real Israeli policy of, if we think of areas A, B, and C in the West Bank, A being full Palestinian control, B Palestinian but Israeli security control, C full Israeli control, that if it is still not possible to entirely expel Palestinians from the West Bank, at least to, as much as possible, move them out of area C and into the urban areas, which are more likely to be A or B. And this is one of the ways that you accomplish it. So there was one Rasatim was a shepherding community that fled already in August of 2022. But this last week, we Jews celebrated the holiday of Shavuot. 50 days after Passover night, they'll say that the first night of Passover, we celebrate because God already says in the Torah, I'm not just freeing you for freedom's sake, but to bring you to Mount Sinai, receive and accept the yoke of Torah. And we count the days from the day after Passover, first night of Passover, up until Shavuot. A year ago, it was on the eve of Shavuot that the first of many, many communities that have fled or been expelled over the last year was Ein Samia. And in the days leading up to Shavuot, we were there as a protective presence. They always said, it's too late, we're not going to stay. But at least we were protecting them so that they could dismantle their homes, pack up, and move. And I was entirely prepared. One of the traditions of the Shavuot is that you spend up the whole night, stay up the whole night studying Jewish texts. I was prepared to do it there, but they finished earlier in the day. But I had a great personal emotional need to teach that night. For many years, it's fine to listen and be taught by others, but I had a real need to teach that night. And what I taught was the following. There's one of the many strange stories or chapters or whatever in the Torah, the Bible, which something you may be familiar with, is what happens, we're taught, if you find someone who's been murdered out in the fields, and you don't know who was responsible. And the Torah says, we then measure the distance between the closest communities, and the closest community, you then have this strange ritual of you break the neck of a calf and throw it into a dead ravine, dry ravine, and there's a washing of the hand. That's where the whole idea of washing your hands of responsibility comes from. And they recite, Yadenu lo shafachnu tadam hazeh v'lo ra'inu. We did not shed this blood and we did not see it. So our sages 2,000 years ago asked, could it really be that anyone could possibly think that the elders of the community went out and murdered somebody? And the answer was the following. If that person came through their community and no one provided food, no one guided them through as they continue on their journey through areas that might be dangerous, and so on, it is if they had shed the blood. And why did I teach this? Because it's so easy to blame our awful government, and we do have the most extreme government we've ever had, to blame the settlers. But there are more and more expanding levels of responsibility. There are those, it's only a very small percentage of the settlers who actually do the most violent actions. There are those who teach them, who support them, who look the other way. They say, we wouldn't do this, we're opposed to it. And all of the Israelis I already mentioned who are opposed to the occupations, but sit in their homes or coffee houses and say, isn't it terrible? And what about me? I can say, hey, I'm Arik Ascherman. I've been fighting these things for 29 years. My beard was red when we started, first time I met Ron. And we've had victories, and we've done this, and we've done here, and this and that. But I didn't stop it. And clothes only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. I was also responsible. Another one of the communities that fled already still before the war was El Baca. In late June, a year ago, a new outpost was set up, basically blocking their access road. On July 7th, the home closest to the outpost went up in flames at 6:30 in the morning. And the residents asked us to be there for 2 nights to guard them. And we did that. We didn't have what we created later on in the summer, a large group of human rights defenders willing to do protective presence. And I succumbed. Saying we have limitations. I said, after 2 days, well, we did this for 2 days, that's what you asked for, and it's gonna be hard for us to maintain this. It's okay if we'll stay in touch, we'll be as often as we can, we'll come if the calls to meet us. I said, okay, but it wasn't okay. I started packing up the next day. And some of you actually might have seen, was our New York Times Patrick Kingsley article, I tweeted Patrick to see some of these communities, including some of the refugees from Obaka. I asked if we had stayed, we'd been there, would you have stayed? So yes, we would have. He later saw how distressed I was at that and kind of backtracked a bit, but that's what he said. We would have stayed. And so this year, you know, in the month before our Rosh Hashanah, in the Jewish tradition, you start the morning prayers even earlier than usual to say penitentiary prayers, penitential prayers. Prayers up to penitentiary, I don't know. And as often as I could during that month, I said them in some of these communities. Because all of us are responsible. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say, in a democratic society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. Some are guilty, but all are responsible. And this last report, just last week, I was almost thrown back in the same maelstrom. Yusuf and Muhammad, one of the communities that we're now trying to protect. Said, that's it, I'm leaving tomorrow. I can't have a listen. The settlers in the new outposts that are coming with their flock up to my window twice a day. The fact that I can beat them. The fact that the security guard that came and said, this field isn't yours anymore, it's mine. Now, the good news here is we asked, we would try to hang on for a few more days, see what we could do. I made the commitment that we would be there as much as necessary. Even now, if necessary, although I've got a team in place. If it's not working, I'm going to cut for this, I will be there. It's my word. And we actually made contact with some Army officers that have taken responsibility for keeping the settlers away. And for the last couple of days, what was he say? The settlers seem to have packed up their outposts and have stayed away. I hope that it will stay that way. But just today, on my way to Baltimore from DC, I'm dealing with 25, 30 settlers that showed up and forced another family to flee from Deer to the One. The outskirts of Deer to the One, the new outpost there. Apparently, they escaped with most, but not all of their flock. And it seems that their home may have been destroyed. Find out. That's what's ongoing. Is ongoing. And we did over the summer. Begin, first of all, as more and more communities went to the threat, and I got into arguments with some of my fellow human rights defenders who said, we can't do it. We don't have the ability to be a protected presence. And I just said, that's not my nice. That cannot be. After 3 communities had already fled, and we did create the movement. Not again, we had another 18 communities that have fled have been expelled. But our commitment has to be there. And even with the welcome increased international pressure, including the United States, with sanctions on some of the most violent sectors and settlements. Another thing has to be said on this. If we succeed tomorrow in totally stopping settler violence, it is still a settler victory. We don't return those communities. So another part of our work, of course, is the legal work. To do the legal work, and again, there's been some promising developments. I don't want to exaggerate, but there have been some promising developments. The response of the state generally has been, well, they can go back. They chose to leave. They can go back. And that's technically true. Not one of those communities got a expulsion order. It's all done through fear or by gunpoint. And of course, what we've said is, well, if the state does not do what its obligation is to protect people, being able to go home technically is meaningless. And of course, also let's not forget that even in some cases, the homes that they were living in before fleeing were quote unquote illegal because they were built without the permits that are almost impossible to get. Or maybe the settlers came in afterwards in the middle of the night and destroyed what people left behind. Or maybe as in Sandman, they dismantled their own homes and take them where they were moving to. And so the Israeli High Court has demanded of the state that it explain what it will do to actually protect the ability of people to return to their homes. Now, again, that's not a final ruling. The court could fold in the end after getting some unsatisfactory, disingenuous answer from the state, but I mean, all kinds of things can still happen. But it is some little cause for hope. But the point is that if we do not return people to their homes, we really haven't done too much. The last thing I want to say before opening things up to discussion. I want to talk theology for a second. Throughout history, not just Jews, facing disasters, people who are believers have asked God, why don't you nurture me? For me, one of the greatest theological challenges is why God has given us free will when we are free to abuse it so terribly, to oppress others. My feeling has always been that there's something in terms of God's way of seeing the world incredibly important, that it's we manage to put along with something called co-creation, being God's partners in repairing and sanctifying and doing the work of creation. So when our temples were destroyed 2,000 years ago, we said, we said, the reason this happened to us is because of our sins. What other people did to us was because of what we had agreed with each other and to God. Not too many people were able to use that kind of response from the Holocaust. So we did. More like Rabbi Ascherman was talking about, what we do with that free will. Today, from my point of view, the theological challenge is double. It is what is continuing to be done to us, and it's also what we're doing to others. Know that one of the very important mid-19th century Rabbi Shimshon Hirsch said in his Torah commentary, commenting on one of the 36 times that the Torah commands us how we're supposed to treat the non-Jews living among us. God already figured out back then that was going to be the most difficult thing to obey, so it's repeated more than anything else in the Torah. Said that Toivat Mitzrayim, the abomination of Egypt, is simply this: that they believe that might makes right, and because they had absolute power over you, they had the right to do with us what they wanted. Our enslavement, everything else was a function of this idea that absolute power gives you the absolute right to treat others under your control as you wish. And speaking several decades before Theodore Herzl, the founder of modern political Zionism, he says the Torah is predicting that someday, thank God, we will have a state. And warnings, Herzl says, when you will have that state, you must not use the power you will then have against others the way it was used, the Egyptians used it against you. That's maybe an impossible request. Psychologists tell us that the children who were beaten are more likely to beat their own children. We repeat their behaviors. But according to Hirsch, that's what the Torah is commanding us. You must not do that. And in 1988, Samach Mizhar, one of the great Israeli authors, so that of course we must do what we must ensure our survival. But we can't just do whatever we want to do, even if it's what all the rest of the world does. I mean, think what the United States would do if it was attacked as we were attacked on October 6th. Think what happened on 9/11. If we say that there are no red lines, the name of defense, because Hamas is, he wasn't talking about Hamas back then, but embedded in civil foundation, whatever the case may be, is permitted to explode babies. Then something has been the ground, we destroyed the ground underneath our feet. And so in our prayers, we say every day, at least 3 times a day, may our eyes behold the return to Zion in mercy. My personal prayer, I'd say, God, we failed. We screwed up. Not just Jews, as humanity, we screwed up. You wanted us to fix the world on our own, but we haven't managed to do it. And even if it were to be true, which I don't agree with, that somehow there is no other way to legitimately defend ourselves than to have civilian casualties and explode babies, whatever else. Why do you put us in a situation where that is the situation that we're in? And so, coming back to Zion, which also in our prayers is now goes to our ability to come back. Please inspire humanity. When you come back in Rachamim and mercy, inspire all humanity to do so. And force us to start to treat each other with Rachamim and with passive loving kindness. Let me stop there. It's your turn for questions, discussion, disagreements, arguments. I will say, as was said, that to do what we're doing, and we've been spending money we don't have. We don't have money for all the legal cases we're doing to return people to their homes. We don't have the money we've been spending to do emergency aid to expel communities that need to feed their flocks, or rebuild some kinds of homes, or other things that we're spending money on. And to the extent that people can help us, we can accept cash tonight. People can write a check, checks of $100 or more, to the New Israel Fund. The memo line for what I said it, but that's something called American Support for Israel, with us in the memo line, and we'll get that as well. And we'll put them in the mail for you. Sign up on the mailing list, and we can send around, and we can also send you the information on how to do that online, as well, of course, as you'll get from us urgent action bulletins and other things that are going on. But your turn.
Rabbi, we had one question online. One of our attendees online said, I am visiting Israel next week. What can I do while I'm there? But I personally would add that I know a lot of people in this room, different groupings of us have been trying to engage our members of Congress to do something about the current situation with Gaza, but I know a lot of people historically have been working a long time. What more can we all do, whether we're visiting Israel or we're here in the United States? I think you may have answered in part that question.
Well, this person will also be here, but if they want to be in touch and they have interest in actually participating in the protective presence that we're doing in communities. I mean, even tonight, after midnight, with all this attacks going on, we sent out a crew to be in one of the communities in addition to the other communities that we already had people tonight. Although I'll be here, of course, we can organize people that don't want to be quite so hardcore and just want to do an informational tour and see what the realities are. We can do that as well. And of course, here, in my meetings with officials here, my message will be, on the one hand, okay, on the one hand, we are appreciative. I can say that again also in a second, but we are appreciative that the international community and including the United States has now been sanctioning some of the most violent settlers and communities and applying some pressure to make sure that food gets into Gaza and these kinds of things. But the fact is that that is not enough. Settler violence is not stopped. A lot of their money for these settlers is coming from the United States, and steps could be taken to shut that down. There could be an enforcement of the Lehi law. I'm not for singling Israel out either to coddle or to punish, but there are existing laws about the use of U.S. military hardware and not supplying hardware that's going to be used for human rights violations. And so, of course, here you do have a responsibility. Well, I meant it when I said teaching that story about the elders and the murdered person, that we're all responsible, and that means that you're responsible here as well, if we're in a global community. And again, I don't think that Israel has less of a right to exist than other countries. I'm not seeking our destruction, but I do think that Israel needs to be held to certain standards, and that ultimately it's in our best interest, I have to say as well.
So anyone have questions or comments?
Yes,
You know, how can things not only get better, but not get much worse? As long as America, and Israel doesn't care what the rest of the world does or thinks, they only care what America. And as long as America finances, arms, and gives diplomatic and political cover to Israel, I just don't see how things aren't gonna get worse than they already are. What do you think?
well. Obviously, the United States is Israel's biggest ally. But Israel is concerned about what some of the other countries in the world think about as well. For example, the EU is Israel's largest trading partner. So there's also leverage there. But you're right, of course, that the greatest leverage comes from here. And yes, and that's why you have a responsibility here to try to influence the government here. Again, I don't want to see Israel sold out the river, but I think that there must be pressure that the quid pro quo for the support that Israel gets from this country is certain basic standards of human rights and decency. I'll also say that, you know, one of the ongoing debates among Israeli activists are between those who think that we Israelis are hopeless, maybe also Palestinians, that the only thing that will ever bring about change is pressure from without. And then there are those of us like myself, frankly, who think that it has to be a combination. I've been greatly disappointed by the international community too many times. You know, again, before this war, as 3 communities were already fled their homes, we got about a little bit of team sympathy from the UK, a letter or two from the EU, and a site visit, but making clear that they weren't going to do much more than that, and thundering silence from the US. And again, it's changed. I am in pretty constant contact with US diplomats and this kind of thing. But I do ultimately think there must be a combination. I do not believe that pressure from without will alone bring about what has to happen. I think both Israelis and Palestinians are ultimately too stubborn. I think there also has to be a changing of hearts and minds of Israelis and Palestinians. But absolutely, your job here is to put people's feet to the fire and try to, and I said, frankly, for our own good. Because, you know, that image of the lizard I gave, not only are Palestinians not ever going to have the basic freedoms and rights that all human beings deserve, but we Israelis are not going to have the peace and security that we deserve as long as this continues. Yes.
There are a lot of activists in the US who feel who are either gonna sit out the next election or not vote for Biden because the Biden administration's support for Israel and the ability to hold back any weapons. What do you think about that?
Well, the question is, what do I think about not voting for Biden because of his unbridled support for Israel? As human rights organizations, both in Israel and abroad, we can't be supporting or opposing any particular candidate or party, rather talking about policies. What I can tell you though is that, when I was here in November, what I understood was that some of Biden's top advisors were saying that if you retreat from the support you're giving Israel, it's going to hurt you in the elections. And by the way, some of the support the world has given Israel, I'm grateful for. We were them. Of course, now, as you correctly pointed out, you've seen there's a second side to it. That Biden may very likely be punished in the polls by those who say because of the level of support. I think actually that's one of the reasons why the administration has become a little bit more engaged in terms of settler violence and in, the peer and these kinds of things to get more food into Gaza and these kinds of things. I'm gonna take off my kippa as running for organization, just talking to myself. I can tell you, I will have to tell you though, that I used to have all these arguments with my late mother, because once I moved to Israel, I stopped voting in US elections. I just said, I have a right to, but my center of life is there. And she would say, it's not just a right, it's a responsibility. In general, American Jews, with the history of the countries that we came from, where there was no ability to participate in elections, becoming a part of our national religion, and I started voting again in the elections because of Trump. Because for me, at that point, it was no longer a question of policies here or there. I wasn't necessarily convinced that Hillary Clinton's positions on Israel were going to be that much better than Trump's or this kind of thing. But for me, it was that someone who was legitimizing hate in this country the way that Trump does, that's what moved me to start voting here again. And so I understand absolutely the feeling that and agree that Biden's feet must be held to the fire. But I also think that you, in terms of the realities of this country, have to think very seriously about what another Trump presidency would mean. Yes.
Some of us on the Quaker side of the family heard a talk in the last month from a chaplain, one of our colleges, and it worked in the West Bank. Max Carter, please.
Yeah, Max Carter.
And you mentioned a group called A Land for All, 2 States, 1 Homeland. And it's a foundation. I'm wondering, it's 20, 30 years old. I guess I have 2 questions.
It's only a couple years old, not 30 years old.
What do you think of it? And the reason I'm asking that is at that same talk, we heard about Kingian nonviolence and the last step of reconciliation, which isn't just shaking hands and going back to your corners. And Kingian nonviolence reconciliation ideally involves celebration of what you have gained together in your negotiations. So that has had me, I think these are related. What do I want for the Palestinians? So I want to ask you, for what do you want for the Palestinians? And is the land for all, 2 states, 1 homeland, a third way of getting there?
Okay, so again, I'm gonna step out of, take off my kippah, running human rights organization. Where it's beyond our mandate, be for, or against, a 1 or a 2 or a 10-state solution of borders here or there. That's not our mandate. As far as I'm concerned, no matter what will be whoever is ruling, um, in the West Bank or anywhere else, or inside Israel, human rights have to be observed. And to the extent, if Israel were to continue to have sovereignty over the West Bank for ever and ever, it wouldn't decrease, it would increase our responsibility for equal human rights and everything else. Having just said that, as the representative of a human rights organization, I don't have a position on a 1 or a 2 or a 10-state solution. And also as an individual, I think it's a huge mistake to say there's one correct solution, all the rest won't work. It really isn't ultimately a matter of what we can finally agree on. And for many, many years, I would say, I have always said that those who declared the death knell of the 2-state solution were way too premature. And I don't say that anymore. And it's not that I'm like for or against the 2-state solution, as I said, but when I look at the facts on the ground, it is increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to, with the number of settlers and infrastructure on the ground, to really imagine the classic 2-state solution of 67 borders, removing all the settlements. And on the other hand, a 1-state solution is an anathema to most Israelis and many Palestinians, by the way. I mean, Palestinians are more divided on that. But some also think that a 1-state solution would just be another form of hegemony, Israeli hegemony. So then the question becomes, can there be variation of the theme? Like this idea of 2 states and 1 homeland. And those ideas don't have much traction right now, but they are an interesting way of trying to think out of the box. And in that sense, and I know some of the people that are involved in trying to promote that, and I think they're worthy ideas. Okay. Then the second thing you asked was about what I envision.
I'm sure that, yeah. Human rights you've answered, of course.
First thing, one of the things I always say is I have to be very careful as an Israeli about envisioning for Palestinians. I mean, it is, even when we think we're the good guys and we're the people, it's just another form of paternalism and occupation to think that it's our role or right to envision that way for Palestinians. I simply say, and what I hear, I hear often from Palestinians is many Palestinians say, we're not really interested in who will be the government. We're ultimately interested in is that we should have the basic things that human beings want anywhere around the world. Yes.
Hi. Do you see any glimmer of the development of a Palestinian movement that's offering anything new and beyond the Palestinian Authority and Hamas and Islamic Jihad? I know in Gaza, everybody's.
One of the reasons that people used to laugh at me for many years for being like one of the last optimists standing. And as a person of faith, I'm still optimistic in the long run. I'm not particularly optimistic in the short term, partly because I don't really see at the moment any really evolving leadership on either side. That I think, now, things can change at any moment, of course. Did I already talk about Victor Turner and the little moments? No, okay, so, first of all, although we can debate what we think about the Egyptian peace treaty, I always remember that a week before Sadat came to Jerusalem, Israeli opinion polls were dead set against what people were in favor of a week later, because, and opinion polls have shown through the years, generally a same majority of Israelis and Palestinians who want to compromise, negotiate agreement, but even a larger percentage is saying, we want it, and they don't. We're incredibly parallel that we all say, we want it, but they're the problem. And I've always said, we don't really need another peace plan. We need a binational psychiatrist. Because I think the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians, if they believe that it was possible, it's like sour grapes. When you don't think something's possible, you convince yourself you don't want it. And if you believe it's possible, you know you do want it. But one of my teachers in rabbinic school, Rabbi Larry Hoffman, we always quote from the social anthropologist Victor Turner, who talked about liminal moments of liminality. And liminal moments are those times betwixt and between. And he said these transitional moments are fraught with huge danger and huge potential. And again, certainly on the Israeli side, maybe on the Palestinian side as well. We always used to talk about this Yom Kippur War in '73 as the crisis of faith in Israeli society, and now this war has trumped that in spades. Israelis have lost faith in almost everything they believe. The general working assumption, polls seem to show that first of all, Israelis want to throw all the bums out, get rid of all of the current political and military leadership. But that doesn't mean that they were going to replace it with something better, because there's also been a further hardening that less belief that there's anybody to talk to on the other side, less belief that peace is possible, less willingness to compromise. And don't forget that Netanyahu is a radical left winger of the Likud. He would have been purged long time ago, except for he's the golden eggs. But when you have that liminal moment, even if it's fraught with great danger, that it may take us more over the abyss, there's also the possibility when people are questioning everything they believe in, and maybe they'll see that they're holding on to that dead lizard, that as long as they're holding it on to, they're not going to get the things that they want and deserve in life either. And the question is, will we have the ability to help our fellow Israelis understand that? It's a tough order, it's a big if, but there is a possibility. Yes.
There was a US congressperson, not long ago, who was censured for using the term from the river to the sea. And when I was in, Israel with Rabbi Ascherman rights about 20 years ago, correct or incorrect, I came back believing that the Zionists were the ones using the term from the river to the sea. And the idea behind that was God gave us this land. And so my question is about the settler activists, the secular expansionists. I suspect that these are not primarily evil people, but they have this belief God gave us this land and so forth. And you can decide whether or not this question is worth answering. But to what extent is this behind, their activities, et cetera? And I don't know what one can do about that, but, I think it's good to look at why people do things and not just they're evil people, driven by hate.
But not only that, one of the old songs of the Likud movement and his predecessors was both sides of the Jordan River. Not just from the river to the sea, but the other side as well. This is a question I often get, particularly as a rabbi. How can you as a rabbi, you cannot read the Torah without it being very clear that God promises us the land of Israel in perpetuity. And the Quran mentions it as well, by the way. And we don't believe, as do some Christian denominations, that the covenant was broken in the sense that that's all, we don't believe that. So how do I, as a rabbi, how can I promote something which does not endorse that exclusive right to the river, to the sea, if not beyond? So as I said, and I'll answer your question going beyond that. But yes, you're right. That is at the heart of the settler movement, which is not entirely all religious Jews, but driven by religious Jews, without a doubt. And that is at the heart of their belief, without a doubt. It's a very dangerous fusion of religion and nationalism. But yes, it's true, if you take the Bible seriously, God makes a promise. But then let's look at Deuteronomy, many of the prophets, where God also says, in spite of that promise, if you are not acting justly and correctly, the land itself is going to spit you out. And in fact, the covenant may never be broken, but the amount of land that we're going to be on at any time in history may expand or contract according to our behavior. So then, of course, what the question becomes, what is the behavior that God expects or rejects? Within that religious Orthodox, most Orthodox movement, they would say that once God, in 1967, back in 1948, in our prayer for the state of Israel, we say it's Reshit Tzmikat Gulatim, it's the beginning of the spreading of our redemption. And many people were intoxicated in 67. We thought we were going to be destroyed, and we weren't destroyed. We had this miraculous victory, and the entire biblical land of Israel was in our hands. And there were a few lone voices who spoke out against that. But maybe, as opposed to the idea that to now give up that land that God's given back to us, that's the sin. Maybe the thing that would not make us worthy of holding on to that land is abusing other human beings. And it's actually idolatry. I learned many years ago, there aren't that many people out there anymore that are worshiping golden cows. Gold maybe, but not golden cows. What the things that, and I've learned over the years that things that are good become idolatry. I'm very moved by flags. I'm very moved by national anthems, to tears sometimes. And because they move me so much, I know how dangerous they can be. When I was a congregational rabbi, and most synagogues in the United States and Canada at least have on one side of the Israeli flag, the other side the American Canadian flag, I've seen many churches with, the American and the Christian, but I would say there aren't many flags in the sanctuary. Went on the rabbi, because we worship God here, not flags. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel again, when he would speak out against racism, he would say as iconoclastic as the Bible is against making any images of God, of course, the Quran even more so. There is an image of God in the Bible. It's a human being. The land is holy. You cannot escape the idea that the land is holy if one takes seriously the Bible. It's like a living being. But it's not in God's image. Human being is in God's image. And so, from my point of view, when one puts the land as holy as it is in our belief, ahead of that Palestinian shepherd or farmer or whoever of any human being, because they are created in God's image and not the land, that's idolatry.
Maybe one more.
All right, and afterwards, we can finish the formal part if people don't want to schmooze more. Until they turn out the lights, I'll hang out here, it's fine. Please do sign up. I don't know if we can even pass around the sign up sheet for me. Okay, and again, if people, I don't know if we can pass around a hat or something like this. People want to give a check or some cash. I saw two hands. I saw one here. I see four hands. I'll take all the hands. I'll try to answer them all together. So yeah.
I'm Aaron, I've been the president of Homewood for the past 2 years. And then just want to say first, because you do this, they said, I'm not going to do this one. So Homewood is a synagogue committed to Palestinian solidarity, not to being anti-occupation. You're facing with so much rejection from the Baltimore Jewish community. And that seems very like a petty concern. In context of what you just said.
How to deal, okay, one,
Yeah.
okay, over here, yes, I'll take all the questions, I'll answer them one at a time, yes, please.
It's long, I can ask you.
Okay, over here. There was one, okay, one, you, and then remember, okay.
That's why I say that I don't think it's gonna ever be peace unless there's justice, social and political justice for both people. There are about 7 million Israeli Jews, there are about 7 million Palestinian Arabs, more or less. Neither are gonna drive the other into the city. They have to figure out how to live together so that folks are not going to constantly go to funerals of their friends and loved ones.
The sword comes into the world because of justice delayed, justice denied, and the improper using of Torah. Yes.
First of all, but when my dad grew up in Palestine, back in, he was born in 1930. From the time he was a Catholic, until he came to the States to go to school. And I guess you kind of addressed this, but there is a long history of the Jews identifying with Israel as their home, and the Palestinians also identify with that as their home. But the words, like how, I'm gonna just reference something real quick. One of my favorite books is about this big. It's called Children's Letters to God. It's got all kinds of children's letters to God, from everything from thank you so much for my baby brother that you really wanted to be German Shepherd, to the one that really touches me. It's the one that says, we've crossed the lines around the countries. So I want to know, like, how malleable have those lines been around Israel? And it seems like the line keeps getting pushed further and further toward the sea, functionally.
I mean, yeah, there's the borders from the UN, in RV7, for Brazil, and here and here. I'll just say that, personally, nation states are a relatively modern concept. I'd be happy to someday live in a border, world without borders, no more United States, Mexico, or Canada, no more Sweden, Denmark, Norway, no more borders in the Middle East. That's what we've got now, which was a good question, yeah. And I'm gonna get back to your question.
I just hope that you were personal of the atheist.
Who was?
Theodore.
Yes. Well, he was a very assimilated Jew who, I don't know what he believed religiously or not, but he was very assimilated. And it was only after the Dreyfus trial that he came to the conclusion that assimilation isn't really possible. To get back to your question. I can tell you that through the years, there have only been a few cases I knew about where I was boycotted or not allowed to speak in some place in the Jewish community. Maybe many others I didn't know about. And it's become more difficult over the years, without a doubt. But in those cases where it happened, I always made a point of marching myself into the office of whoever seemed to be responsible and introducing myself and saying, I'm sure if you really knew who I was and who we are, you wouldn't have done this, because you couldn't possibly want a Jewish community where you're drawing those kinds of people that are in and out, when the Jewish community is better off when we're all together. And we all have our roles. Now, and I almost always got an apology and said it wouldn't happen again. It's difficult. And there are some of the more radical Jewish organizations that, on the other hand, don't want too much contact because they're afraid of being co-opted. There's another image in the Torah when the spies come back from spying out the land. Remember, 10 come back with they say there are these giants in the land, it's an awful place, and we'll never be able to go in to defeat these people, except for Joshua and Caleb. What they said is there are these giants in the land, and we compare to ours like grasshoppers in their eyes. And the rabbi said they were as grasshoppers in their eyes because they saw themselves as grasshoppers. So I think there's no easy solution, but I think it begins with remembering that you are not a part of the Jewish community because of the beneficence of somebody else, but by right, and that the Jewish community is worse off without you. And when we remember that and believe it ourselves, and therefore don't just create a self-fulfilling prophecy. I can't promise it will succeed, but I think that that's the beginning. Let me conclude, again, I'll sit here and schmooze. Again, if there's something we can put out to people that would like to see some money or checks, that'd be great. But to say that, and most of you here, I know, in one way or other, are activists. Both on this and on many other issues. And to be an activist, you have to have a certain predilection for beating your head against the wall. but every once in a while, the wall breaks. I remember as an undergraduate in ancient history at Harvard, back then, the issue was trying to get the university to divest of its holdings and corporations doing business in South Africa. I gave my heart and soul to that, spent much more time doing protests and everything else than in the classroom. And it didn't happen. But it happened the year after the year I graduated, because of what we've done. It's like what we say in the Jewish tradition, "Lo alech hamnocha ligmor, v'lo atah ben kohen l'patem." You are not expected to complete the task, but neither are you from doing your part. So if you don't do your part, it ain't gonna happen. And so we gotta go in and break some walls. And break, even if it means sometimes beating our heads against walls. And there's a wonderful image in the Talmud that we're supposed to look at all of life as two perfectly balanced scales. And both on the personal and cosmic level. We never, ever know what little act that we take that seems meaningless, ineffective, irrelevant at the time, whether that will be the little act that tips those perfectly balanced scales one way or the other. And so my parting hope and wish and prayer and blessing for all of us, whether it be the Middle East or any of the other spheres of our personal and public and spiritual lives, is that we should always have the courage and the wisdom and the faith to tip those scales in the right direction. Inshallah. May it be God's will. May He give it something.
Where's the bucket to put the money in?